Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to be looking at the Chapter 7 exercises here, this practice with feedback section. And yeah, let's get started. Okay, so in the first section here on tab 1, we've got a bunch of drop downs. And so I will leave this up to all of you to just kind of look through and do your review of notes and the materials, etc. Look at the PowerPoint for lecture, etc. to kind of get some help there. But let's jump over and take a look at the more of the analysis work problems here. Okay, so starting at exercise 9, and in this problem, we have a company that collects 50% of its sales in the month of the sale, 30% the following month, and 20% in the second month after the sale. And so we want to calculate budgeted cash receipts for March and April. So what we can kind of ascertain from the information above is that basically for every month's worth of sales, we're going to be collecting the amount of that sale, for example, for January, in January, February, and March. February sales we're going to collect in February, March, and April. March, April, May for the March sales. April, May, June for April, so on and so forth. So as you can see, you've got 50%, 30, and 20. And so if we look at March, we need to factor kind of all that in, right? So, so let's do a formula to capture that information. And again, we're in March, and so we're going to need to go back to January, because we're going to collect 50% of these sales in January, 30% in February, and 20% in March. So let's do that 20% in March piece there, because that's what we're analyzing March. So again, it was $400 in January, and then we're going to be collecting 20% of that in March. And then we've got February sales. Remember, we collected 50% in February, 30% in March. So that was 320 times 30%. And finally, in March, we have the actual amount of 480 for March, with 50% of that being collected in March. So if we add all three of those pieces together, we get $416. It tells us correct, so we're good to go. And then for April, we can kind of do a similar thing. I'm going to copy this formula and just paste that in. Whoops, that was weird. Usually it doesn't let you click into the non-input boxes very bad. Okay, so this number's not right, 416 yet. So let's go through, and we just need to update some of these amounts. So again, in April, we're going to be still having collections from February, from March, and April. Right? No more from January, because we collected the last 20% there in March. But in April, we're going to have $320 was in February initially, and now later, to the second month after the sale, we're collecting 20%. So that's that piece. The March amount that we're going to be collecting in April then is the 30%, because it's March was 480 times the 30%. And then again, we're going to collect half of the sales that were directly in April in that month. So that brings us up to 328 total. And in our homework problems, we kind of wrote this out more in like a table, showing how the collections go each month for every month going forward. And that's a little easier to see, but we're essentially just doing the same thing here with the formula. So just another way to analyze that. Okay, so here's a similar kind of problem, but with payments and purchases. And so again, we're going to pay 60% in the month of the purchase, and then 40% the next month. So when we look at March disbursements, we're going to have not 3 components here necessarily, but 2, because in March, we're going to be paying for 40% of the purchases we made in February. And then in the actual month of March, we had 240, and we're paying, oh, whoops, 60% there. That was supposed to be 40% on the February amount. And again, I'm going to just take this formula. It's going to be similar for both these other months. So April disbursements, we had 240 and 320. So we just need to update these two, 240 from March and then 320 from April. And then for May, we're going to have 240 from April and 560 from May. Oh, wait, what did I mess up there? Oh, 240 was March. We want to do April, right? So April was 320. No, still didn't go right. Okay, wait, what am I doing wrong? May disbursements. So May is 400, so we need 60. Oh, where did I? How strange. Okay, I don't know what I was looking at there. Somehow I had the numbers in there funky. But so 320 is from April. 40% of that's collected in May. And then 400 is specifically for May, with 60% being collected in that same month. Okay. So now on exercise 9, we kind of need to put this all together in a way and prepare the full cash budget, assuming the company wants to maintain a minimum cash balance of $80. We pay monthly interest based on that month's beginning loan balance. So we need to list disbursements in the order that they are given, so on and so forth. Okay. So let's start with our beginning cash balance, and it tells us here we have $80, and then we're going to calculate our beginning cash balance for December based on what we've got going on here. And we've got receipts from customers, so cash inflows, $800 here. It just tells us, we might, in other problems, if we do them in class or on the test, maybe we have to do some calculations to figure out how much we're receiving, from the customers in that month. But it just tells us here, basically. Okay, and then as far as disbursements go, list disbursement in the order given. So depreciation expense is an expense, but it's not a cash disbursement. It's not an outflow. The cash disbursement happens when we do the equipment purchase originally, or whatever that purchase is that relates to that depreciation. But as far as cash outflows go, we always don't, you don't include depreciation expense. So if you're looking at total expenses that includes depreciation, you need to back that out if that is a component. But we're just going to ignore it for our purposes. Oh, negative 60. So put all the outflows as negatives. We have a loan balance, 24% annual rate. And so we need some interest payment. And this one, a little tricky. So we have $200 beginning balance. And if you remember from accounting 2, how to calculate interest expense, we take our outstanding loan balance and we multiply that by the interest rate of 24%. And then we divide that by 12. It's got to be negative to get us a amount of interest that we're going to owe on this loan balance. So the loan balance isn't like a cash outflow. It would be a cash inflow when we borrowed that money, but we have to pay interest back to the bank each month. And so we base our interest payment on what that loan balance outstanding is. Okay, other cash expenditures, 120, payments to suppliers, receipts. So we already accounted for the receipts from customers. Salary payments. Negative 80. Yeah, I think that's about it. I'm trying to figure out what is left. What would be in here otherwise? I mean, we have salary. So our total, maybe we need to put beginning, borrowing, depreciation expense, ending, maybe ending cash balance here. To get an ending cash balance, we're going to want to take our beginning plus our cash receipts and then minus all of our cash outflows. So we're missing something. Sorry, bear with me as I figure out. We want to maintain a minimum cash balance of $80. That's fine. We're going to link to the beginning cash balance there. Let's just put in some of the other amounts here. So we have those. So that's 640. Let's see. So again, depreciation expense, we don't need anything there. There was no equipment purchase in December. Our loan balance of $200. Trying to see if it gives us any kind of. So it doesn't tell us that we repaid the loan. Pays the supplier salary payments. Minimum cash balance. I guess maybe we can do. Let's see if any borrowing. Okay, so I have a feeling they want us to put in repayment somewhere. Yeah, repayment there and borrowing. Sorry. Okay, this problem is a little tricky. So, but that's good. Good. I mean, good. I'm making the video so you can follow along, because we don't talk about the repayment necessarily, but we want to maintain a specific balance of $80. So if we can pay down the debt balance to $80, essentially, I think that's where we would want to get it to, because it doesn't tell us otherwise, unless I'm missing it, anything about loan balance. We want to maintain a minimum cash balance, pay interest monthly based on the monthly list disbursements, yada, yada, yada. So we have our salaries, we have our receipts, we have our payment to suppliers, we have our other cash expenditures, loan balance, equipment purchase, and we've got our, let's see if there's anything we're missing here. Oh, our preliminary balance. Okay. That's a little confusing. I think an example would be helpful on this one for us to see how we want to write this out, but that's okay. Okay, so our preliminary balance becomes $336 then before we consider repayment on our loan. So we can pay down the loan $200 basically and still maintain a balance. Let's do this. Is that right? Let's make sure we're, or our ending balance then would become our preliminary balance minus the repayment, ends up at 136. And then we're going to go through and say, okay, so we've now paid back the loan balance. So we have zero outstanding. So there's no interest at that point because we've paid off our debt. So we're saving interest expense. And then we're just going to go through and do the same thing here. 80 again. And again, our preliminary cash balance. We have no need for a repayment now because our debt, is zero. We at least have we don't have to borrow anything because our balance is higher than $80. So good to go. Okay, that one was a little tricky. You gotta kind of know the breakdown or the formatting that we want here. So preliminary balance. I think if I was redesigning this problem, I probably would have made that not a drop down, but just a flat description of what that should end up being, and maybe this repayment as well, and the ending cash balance. So, but yeah, good problem to make us think. Sometimes it's good to have to think what's going on there. So there you go. Let's move on to our next problem. Okay, so we've got a guy with this tomato sauce. We want to keep 10% of the following month's sales as ending inventory. And so we need to figure out our required production as far as inventory goes, etc. So we can begin in the beginning inventory. It tells us that we want 10% of January sales. So January sales are 440. So if we're going to have January 10%, and let's see. Oh, we kind of want to. Sorry, we want to. So if we look at our breakdown, the formula here that we use to figure out, to kind of, there's basically what we're doing is backing into what we need production to be. And so we need to know, what do we expect to sell? Because we have to have that in production. And we want to have desired ending units because we want to keep that in inventory. So we need to produce this much stuff because we have stuff that's going to be gone, and the amount of inventory we want to have at the end of the month, still some back stock. But we have some beginning inventory that we can account for. So again, we've got 400, and a beginning inventory is 10% of January sales, so 440. Oh, it's negative. There we go. Why isn't that working? Okay, and estimated sales we have for January is 440. Desired ending units is 10% of the following month's sales, so 10% of 480. And then required production, then we just basically add all these together. So we need to produce 444 units in January. We're going to sell 440 of those. We had 44 to start, and we're going to end with 48, and that's what this formula basically does for us. Okay, so then we can say, so where are we at here? Estimated sales for February is 480, just pulling in out of the table there. Beginning inventory is the ending inventory, essentially, right? And we want negative. So we can kind of just do that as a formula, that the beginning inventory is last month's ending inventory. And then we want, let's do this with formulas here. So 520 units in March. And we can say next month's times 10%, which is what the formula tells us there. And yeah, desired ending inventory. I guess we can't do this one with a formula because we're not linking to the 560, but times 0.1. Again, that doesn't mean to be negative. That's good. And then this is just adding all those. And so we can just drag our formula across. And this is our formula to get required production. Okay, so let's look at exercise 11. If it takes 5 pounds tomatoes to make a jar of the sauce, we start the January with 100 pounds and want to keep an ending inventory equal to 10% needed for next month's production. There's 20 cents a pound, so we need to prepare our direct materials budget. Oh, excuse me. And so what we want to figure out is the ending value, the cost of the raw materials, essentially. And so we're doing kind of a similar thing up here, but we're adding in the portion that is the cost component, right? So we have the units up here, but we're adding in the cost essentially to be there as well. Okay, and so here, if we are going to say expect, or I guess we want our expected, where are we at? I'm going to get the right breakdown here, so bear with me for one moment. Essentially what we're going to be doing is taking the amounts of production and multiplying them by the cost of production, right? Exactly, like for 20 cents a pound on our tomatoes, and knowing how many. So we got to do kind of like some conversions basically, or some multiplication through to figure out exactly what we are going to want to use as our analysis or our conversion factors or cost essentially. So really what we're doing is this direct materials budget, as we note here. And so we need to know how many units we're going to produce. So we can take required production times the direct material cost per unit. Do we want to do per pound? I guess we want to do per pound. Oh, in pounds. So direct materials needed. So we know how many units. Now we need the needed per unit. So if we say in January, so we have to calculate that. Let's put all the formula together first. This is going to equal our total direct materials needed. So let's take a look here. I can't, got my little, God, this little pop-up is in the way. That's annoying. Okay, not raw materials needed per unit. This is going to be total direct materials needed. Production needs, I think that's the right terminology there. Yep. Okay, and then we're going to add in our desired ending direct materials. And we're going to subtract out what we had at the beginning, kind of like we did above, essentially. And then that's going to equal our direct material purchases, or raw material purchases. I'm not sure if you guys can see this. I'm assuming you can see this on the video, but I've got some kind of glitch happening where this little production budget thing is stuck there. So anyway, I'll just scroll past it, but just FYI, that's annoying. So, and then costs, we end up with our cost. Okay, so these are all the components that we need to consider. We need to know how many units we need. We need to know how many pounds per unit. That'll tell us how many pounds we need to buy. We're going to have some ending inventory in pounds. We have some stuff to start with, and all this gets factored together. And then finally, we analyze, multiply that by a cost to come up with a budget for how much we're going to have to spend. Okay, so now that we have this together, we can look back at the details and say, okay, if we have 5 pounds per jar, we started January with 100 pounds. So down here, where's our beginning inventory of pounds? So I think that didn't work. Desired. Oh, that's desired ending inventory. Sorry. And make it a minus. Make sure you do it, according to the plus or minus. So we have 100 pounds to start. We want to keep an ending inventory equal to 10% needed for next month's production. So desired ending inventory then will be equal to February times 0.1. What are we doing wrong there? Ending inventory, 10% of tomatoes needed for next month's production budget. Oh, jars needed is 48. Okay, so we gotta work through some of these before we're gonna know. Unless we could sort of look at this and say, we want 480 jars. Yeah, let's do it like this. We want 480 jars times 5 pounds per jar. So we would want to have 2,400 in January, but that's just the total pounds. And we want to keep an ending inventory equal to 0.10. So 240 is where we end up with. And that's then going to be our beginning inventory, I believe. Let's see if that goes away. Yeah, so that's just kind of formulaic. But let's go through and do the rest of this. So 440 jars times 5 pounds per jar. Required production in units. Oh, in units. So what are we doing here? How many we're going to sell? 440. And this is just the units, sorry, not the pounds. The pounds is here, so we just put in our 5, and then we multiply them together. So we need 2,200 pounds. We have 240 pounds to start. And so we need to purchase 2,340. So just adding the production needed plus what we need to have extra at the end. So production's all going to be like sold, right? This is what we want to have left over. This is what we started with. And then it tells us 0.2 per pound. And then we just multiply those together, essentially. So then we can kind of go through and do the same thing here. Same, it's about 5 per unit. That's all the same. So figuring out the first little part of the puzzle is a little bit tricky. But then, oh, whoops, that's not going to work. I'm going to link these because I think we can just do it this way. And then we should be able to just drag our formula across that way. One downside, though, we don't have the next month linked in necessarily, but so we just have to type that in. And that's going to be March 5/20. So in March, we're looking at the April. We could have linked it if it was in a cell there, but it's not. So then we can just drag this over, which is basically, right, this is the ending. That's our beginning. Ending and beginning is the same, ending of one month, the beginning of the next. This is just a formula that adds up these three. Still the same cost every month. And so multiplying those out gives us the totals. All right. Tricky. So hopefully you're kind of learning, some of this process. And this does require you to really think analytically, as kind of putting the puzzle together, if you will, and looking at the notes. Because the structure that we want to have for some of these things, like the direct materials budget, is really based on the breakdown that's provided and shown kind of in the notes. And so you might need to reference back to that to make sure that you've got the breakdown correctly. Or, as you're watching the video, you'll get to see how that goes. If you do the first part of this problem, which I did not do, then you'll already have this kind of listed out when you go through to do these problems. So that's probably helpful. Move on to exercise. So in exercise 12, it says it takes our employees 15 minutes to make 1 jar of sauce. Given the following production estimates and assuming hourly wage of $9 an hour, prepare a direct labor budget. So as far as our direct labor budget, again, we just kind of need to take our factors and multiply them through. And with our formula here, we need to start with how many units are going to be produced. And then it tells us above our direct labor hours per unit, and that's going to give us our total hours needed. And then we just need to multiply that by the direct labor costs, or that's going to be our total direct labor cost is our final destination there, but our cost per hour is what we're going to multiply that through. So this one I think will be a little easier than the one above because there's no carryover between months or anything like that. We're just taking each month's production, multiplying by. Oh, now we do need to do a little analysis, right? So if this is per unit, we need, and we're making $9 an hour, we have to kind of convert 15 minutes into a decimal, right? So maybe you could do this in your head because 15 minutes is a quarter of an hour. But the way that you would do that in a math kind of way is to take your 15 minutes, divide it by the total, um, divided by the total minutes in an hour of 60, gives us a quarter. Again, you could probably figure that out without having to do the math, but the 15 minutes is a quarter of an hour. But that's fine. That's how we do it. And then we multiply these together to say we're going to need 110 hours of total time to get the production of this many units, and the total cost per that is the cost. We just put $9 in there for each one because that's what we're going to multiply by, and we get 990. And so the trickiest part of this one is just knowing that you need to convert the hours, or convert from minutes to hours, right? That's what we're really needing to do, because we know it takes 15 minutes. And so you have to say, okay, well, how many hours is that? Because we have cost per hour, not cost per minute necessarily. If we had cost per minute, then we could do direct labor minutes per unit and multiply those together. But we have direct labor cost per hour, so we need to convert that 15 minutes into hours. So that's how you do it. Okay, cool. All right, let's move on to. Well, I guess that brings us to the end, and then we'll have the rest of our problems here, etc. I'll do that in a second video. And let's just leave this first video covering our things here. So I think what I am going to do actually now as I think about it. Let's go through and fill these out together, just because it is a little tricky, or you might not know exactly where to look to fill these out. So, but let's do that together. So let's start with exercise 2. I will leave these ones for you all to do yourselves. But in what order are manufacturing firms' budgets prepared? Oh, I got that weird little drop down thing that's up there. So manufacturing budgets, in what order are they prepared? We want to start with a sales budget. So we need the sales budget because it tells us, we need to know how much we're gonna sell in order to develop an idea of how much to produce, right? We don't want to overproduce things or underproduce enough. We don't have enough inventory to sell, or we have too much inventory. And then we're going to go through and do our operating budget. So that's going to be, we have our direct material. These are all components of that operating budget: direct materials, direct labor, and overhead. And so that kind of gets us. Maybe down here. Okay, no, it doesn't really speak to it necessarily, but there is, this is kind of our development all the way through production and the cost of producing the items. Now, keep in mind that if we were doing a full on budget for the manufacturing firm, we would also, need to include selling and administrative expenses budget, a capital expenditures budget, and put those all together to create a full set of budgeted financial statements. But as far as these parts go, that's kind of the first, whatever this is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps of the budget there. Okay, so as far as preparing a production budget, you kind of have this formula that tells us, the first thing again that we need to figure out. We kind of always start with how much are we going to sell. That really drives the thought process behind how much do we need to produce. Again, because you don't want to underproduce or overproduce. You want to produce, or at least plan to produce the exact amount that you want. So we start with our total sales for the period. Then we want to add in our ending inventory desired, because again, we want to not just sell everything that we make. We want to have some extra, some back stuff. And then this idea of having some extra, we're going to have that as we're going to have some inventory already on hand. So we need to back that out so we don't overproduce. And all those things together is going to give us our required production. To prepare a direct materials budget, um, we're going to kind of need to do sort of a similar type of a process, but factoring in some of the direct materials needed per unit and also the cost of those direct materials. So we're going to again start with how many, this idea, what we started with sales, but here we're going to do required production, which is kind of a carry down. Right? So we start with our production budget, then we go in here and say, okay, if we know we're going to produce this much, how much do we need, to buy? So then we can come through and says raw materials per unit. Okay. And that's going to give us our total raw materials needed or direct materials needed. Oh, sorry, not per unit, but raw materials. Sorry, that should be the final one. Raw materials needed. So raw material production times raw material per unit should equal total desired raw materials needed. Production needs. Okay, that's a funny way of saying that, but good thing we do this together. We'll figure this out as we go. Okay, so then we're going to add in our desired ending inventory because we're going to want to end again with some stuff. Subtract out our beginning inventory, like we did above. And all these things together is going to give us our total raw materials to be purchased. And then the important factor of the cost of raw materials per unit. Oh, that didn't work. Where is the cost? Oh, cost. Okay, cost per raw material. Sorry, not per raw material per unit. I guess. A little very kind of funny little distinction. But then we do all this work, and essentially what we're arriving at is the total cost of our raw material purchase, essentially. So how many units do we need to produce? How much material do we need to produce for each unit? Individual types of, maybe this is one unit takes 4 pounds of something, so that's where you break it down. But then you add in, you account for your ending and beginning and your desired ending. What is your beginning? And then we factor in the cost component to get the total cost of the purchases. Okay, to prepare a cash budget, excuse me, we're going to want to figure out our beginning. We want to have our beginning cash balance to start. We're going to add in our cash inflows or our receipts. We're going to subtract out our cash disbursements. That's going to give us, I think that's going to give us our preliminary balance there. Yep. And then we're going to add in potential borrowings. We're going to subtract out potential repayment loans, and that will give us our ending cash balance. And so these ones are kind of nuanced where it's kind of an either or, right? Because if you have a need to borrow money, then you'll borrow. But if you have an excess of cash where you can pay back the loan, that's where you're going to get a subtraction preliminary balance. So it's not like you're going to borrow money and then repay the loan with the money you just borrowed. So again, this is just kind of an either or, not of both, of borrowing and repayment of loans. Okay, so in exercise 6, to prepare a merchandise purchases budget, we're going to go through and figure out, our goal here essentially is how much do we need to buy. And so this one's going to be really similar to how much do we need to produce, but the difference here is that we're a merchandiser, so we buy stuff to resell it. We're a manufacturer. But so the process is going to be really similar. So we want to look at total budgeted unit sales, desired ending units. We want to back out our beginning units and all that stuff. So I think here we want our ending, back out our beginning. That'll give us our total purchases required. Let's say that's per unit. This will be our sales, estimated sales units. So everything we plan to sell, how much do we want to have left over? How much should we have as a beginning thing? Because we don't have to buy that. It's something we already have in stock to start with. And then we go through and we take the cost or price per unit into account to figure out what's the total cost of our merchandise purchases overall. So similar process, like I just said, as the manufacturing budget. The manufacturing budget does have more components because you need to take into account things like direct materials, direct labor, so on and so forth. For merchandiser, you're just doing units and not figure out the cost of production necessarily. But so sales, again, what you want to have after you in your inventory after you do sell the amount you think you're going to sell, and then back out the beginning amount because we have that to start with. So that would reduce the amount of sales that we, the amount of purchases that we need to have to purchase so that we have enough stuff in stock. All right, so hopefully that's helpful. This is a little bit of a tricky chapter. Honestly, if we had started maybe with here, it would have been a little easier to work through some of these other problems. But that's just kind of the process of thinking through some of this stuff and figuring it out. And hopefully you all have found some value in this video. I do think that this is a little bit of a tricky chapter, and this is a tricky part of filling this out and doing this assignment. A lot of the information is from the PowerPoint in terms of how to properly structure. So if you want to dive into that, go into the PowerPoint for lecture. That's in Canvas under the step 3 part where it says view video lecture and complete class notes. There's a PDF there, a PowerPoint, and that's kind of where a lot of the information is housed. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody. Hope you all are having a great day, and I will see you in the next video or in class. All right. Thanks.